The dust from the horizon swirled like a demon's breath across the barren plains as Sarah McAllister pushed forward, each step heavier than the last. The weight of her 6-month-old daughter strapped to her back had long since turned from precious cargo to burning agony, but giving up wasn't an option. Not with 19 miles already behind her and desperation driving her forward like a whip at her heels. Wyoming Territory, 1876. A land where mercy was as scarce as water and twice as precious. Sarah's cracked lips bled as she tried to moisten them. The sun hung mercilessly overhead, bearing down upon the vast emptiness of the high prairie as she trudged along the barely visible trail leading to Sierra Vista. She'd heard tales of the burgeoning cattle town, rumors of work, shelter, and perhaps even kindness. After what had happened back in Rawlins, she needed all three. "Just a little longer, Emma," she whispered to the bundle on her back. The baby whimpered softly, somehow understanding that crying would only waste precious moisture. Sarah marveled at her daughter's resilience, even as her own was failing. She'd been walking since dawn the previous day, stopping only to nurse Emma and catch brief moments of fitful sleep beneath the stars. The modest contents of her pack had dwindled to almost nothing: half a canteen of water, carefully rationed, and a small bundle of jerky. Her husband's gold pocket watch remained tucked in her skirt pocket, the last valuable she owned. She wouldn't part with it unless Emma's life depended on it. James hadn't deserved to die the way he did. Gunned down for standing up to the mining company when they refused to pay what they owed the workers. 8 months of labor, and all she had to show for it was a widow's grief and a fatherless child. The company men had made it clear that complaints wouldn't be tolerated, especially from women. When they'd come knocking at her door 3 days after the funeral, Sarah had gathered what she could carry and fled into the night. The distant cry of a hawk drew her gaze upward, its silhouette circling against the harsh blue sky. She envied its freedom, the ease with which it navigated this unforgiving land. "Lord, give me strength," she prayed, her voice barely audible even to herself. Her faith had been tested sorely these past months, but it was all she had left besides Emma. As the afternoon stretched endlessly before her, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the life she'd left behind in Pennsylvania. Her parents had warned her about following James west, about the dangers and hardships. "The frontier is no place for a proper lady," her father had said. But she'd been in love, and James had painted such a vivid picture of opportunity and adventure. Now those dreams lay buried alongside him in an unmarked grave outside Rawlins. The baby stirred against her back, making soft, cooing noises. Sarah reached back to touch Emma's tiny foot, drawing comfort from the contact. "We'll make it, sweet girl. Mama promises." By mile 25, Sarah's vision had begun to blur. The landscape swam before her, rocks and scrub brush melding together in a hazy, indistinct mass. The sun was beginning its descent, and she knew she needed to find shelter before nightfall brought the bone-deep chill of the high desert. Her foot caught on a rock, and she stumbled, barely catching herself before she fell. The sudden movement startled Emma, who began to cry in earnest. Sarah's heart clenched at the sound. She needed to stop to comfort her child, but stopping meant delay, and delay meant. She shook her head. No, she couldn't think that way. They would make it. They had to. With trembling hands, she unstrapped the baby carrier and cradled Emma in her arms. "Shhh, sweet one, we'll rest for just a moment." Sarah eased herself down onto a flat rock by the trail, wincing as her blistered feet touched the ground. She offered Emma her breast, grateful that her milk hadn't yet dried up despite her own dehydration. As the baby nursed, Sarah took small, careful sips from her canteen. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the sweetest thing she'd ever known. Miles away, Henry Cooper pulled his bay gelding to a halt at the top of a small rise. The cattle drive had been long and difficult, 2,000 head from the Cooper Ranch outside Sierra Vista to the railhead at Cheyenne. And now the return journey with just his most trusted men. Most of the hands had stayed in town to celebrate, but Henry had never been one for carousing. At 32, he'd seen enough of that life to know its emptiness. "What do you think, boss? Make camp here or push on?" asked Mitch, his trail boss, riding up beside him. Henry squinted into the setting sun, measuring the distance to town. "We're close enough. The men deserve proper beds tonight." Mitch grinned, revealing a gap where his front tooth should have been. "They'll appreciate that, Mr. Cooper. Tell them to ride on ahead if they want. I'm going to take a detour, check on that south pasture we talked about. Want company?" Henry shook his head. "No need. I'll see you back at the ranch." As the men moved on, whooping with renewed energy at the prospect of civilization, Henry turned his horse southward. The pasture could wait. What he really wanted was a moment of solitude before returning to the responsibilities awaiting him in Sierra Vista. Being one of the largest landowners in the county meant everyone wanted something from him: loans, jobs, advice, or support for various causes. Out here, with just his horse and the vast Wyoming sky, he could breathe. He rode at a leisurely pace, taking in the landscape he loved so fiercely. This was Cooper land, not all of it legally, perhaps, but in his heart. His father had claimed this territory when it was still wild and untamed, building a modest cattle operation that Henry had expanded into one of the most successful in the territory. His mother had instilled in him a love of learning, ensuring he received an education despite their remote location. It had given him an advantage few ranchers possessed: the ability to navigate both the physical and financial landscapes of the frontier. What it hadn't given him was companionship. Most of the eligible women in Sierra Vista were either too young, too focused on his money, or too intimidated by his position. The ones who weren't were usually passing through, teachers or merchants' daughters who found frontier life too harsh and eventually returned east. Henry had resigned himself to bachelorhood, focusing instead on his ranch and his civic responsibilities. The sun was low on the horizon when he spotted a figure on the trail ahead. At first he thought it might be one of his hands returning for some reason, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman. She moved with the slow, determined gait of someone at the end of their endurance. Curious and concerned, Henry urged his horse forward. Sarah had been walking for what felt like hours since her brief rest. Emma had fallen asleep, a small mercy, but the added weight against Sarah's exhausted body was becoming unbearable. Her feet moved mechanically now, one before the other, without conscious thought. Mile 28, she estimated, though she'd long since lost track of exact distances. The sound of hoofbeats barely registered until they were almost upon her. Fear shot through her veins like ice water had the mining company men found her. She whirled around, nearly losing her balance, one hand instinctively reaching back to protect Emma. A lone rider approached, silhouetted against the sunset. A tall man on a bay horse, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Sarah tensed, ready to flee, though she knew in her condition she wouldn't get far. The rider slowed as he approached, and Sarah could now make out his features. A strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, keen eyes that assessed her with concern rather than threat, and clothing that spoke of hard work rather than menace: plain work shirt, worn denim, and a leather vest that had seen better days. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep but gentle. "Are you all right?" Sarah swallowed, her throat painfully dry. "Just passing through," she managed to say, unwilling to appear vulnerable despite her obvious condition. The man's eyes moved to the bundle on her back, then back to her face. "You're a fair piece from anywhere, walking alone like this. Sierra Vista's still a good ways ahead." "I'll manage," Sarah said, squaring her shoulders despite the trembling in her legs. A smile touched the corners of his mouth, respect rather than amusement. "I've no doubt of that, madam. But night's coming on, and these parts can be dangerous after dark." As if on cue, a coyote howled in the distance. Emma stirred at the sound, whimpering softly. Sarah reached back to soothe her, and the movement nearly cost her what little balance she had left. She swayed dangerously. In an instant, the man was off his horse, steadying her with a strong but careful hand. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "I'm Henry Cooper. I own the Double C Ranch outside Sierra Vista. I'd be honored to offer you and your little one a ride into town." Sarah hesitated, years of caution warring with desperate need. "Why would you help strangers?" "Because my mother would haunt me till my dying day if I left a woman and child alone on this trail," he answered honestly. "And because it's the right thing to do." Something in his steady gaze convinced her. Or perhaps it was simply that she had no choice, her body was failing her and Emma's safety came before pride. "Sarah McAllister," she said finally, "and this is Emma." Henry nodded, his expression softening. "How long have you been walking, Mrs. McAllister?" "Since yesterday morning, from Rawlins." His eyes widened. "That's near 30 miles. You've walked all that way with a baby?" Sarah merely nodded, too exhausted for explanations. "Well, you won't need to walk another step today," Henry said, his tone brooking no argument. "Let me help you up." With gentle efficiency, he helped her onto his horse, then handed Emma up to her. The baby blinked sleepily at the stranger but didn't cry, which Sarah took as a good sign. Henry swung up behind Sarah, keeping a respectful distance while still providing support for her exhausted frame. "We'll take it slow," he said, gathering the reins. "Town's about an hour's ride from here." As the horse began to move, Sarah felt relief wash over her in dizzying waves. The gentle rocking motion and the solid presence at her back lulled her into a state between wakefulness and sleep. She tried to stay alert, aware of the stranger behind her, but her body's demands were too great. "It's all right," Henry said quietly, seeming to sense her struggle. "You can rest. I've got you both." Perhaps it was foolish to trust so quickly, but something about Henry Cooper, his calm assurance, the gentleness with which he handled Emma, the respect in his eyes when he looked at Sarah, spoke of a man whose word could be trusted. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. As they rode toward Sierra Vista, the fading light painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber. Henry kept his promise, maintaining a steady, gentle pace that wouldn't jar the sleeping infant. He couldn't help but marvel at the woman before him, what courage it must have taken to walk so far, carrying such a precious burden, driven by a desperation he could only imagine. "Mrs. McAllister," he said softly after they'd ridden in silence for some time. "If you don't mind my asking, what brings you all this way on foot?" Sarah stirred, pulling herself from the edge of sleep. She considered deflecting the question but found herself too weary for pretense. "My husband was killed 3 weeks ago. The company he worked for, Rawlins Mining, they said it was an accident, but—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice her suspicions to a stranger, regardless of his kindness. Henry nodded, understanding her hesitation. "Mining companies have their own justice out here," he said grimly. "Not much law to stop them. They came to our house after the funeral," Sarah continued, her voice barely audible over the rhythmic hoofbeats. "Said we owed back rent on company housing. When I told them James had paid through the month, they said his death voided the agreement." She clutched Emma closer. "One of them suggested there were other ways I could settle the debt." Henry's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "So you left." "That night. I took what I could carry and headed south. I'd heard Sierra Vista was hiring at the new hotel. That they needed laundresses and maids." "They are," Henry confirmed. "Town's growing faster than folks can keep up with. The Continental Hotel just opened last month." Hope flickered in Sarah's eyes for the first time. "Then I might find work." "I'd say that's a certainty, Mrs. McAllister." Henry paused, then added, "But if you'd prefer, I could offer you a position at the ranch. My housekeeper's been asking for help, especially with the cooking during roundup season. There's a small cabin you and Emma could have to yourselves." Sarah turned slightly to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "You'd offer employment to someone you just met on the trail?" Henry met her gaze steadily. "I'm offering employment to a woman who walked 30 miles with a baby on her back rather than compromise her dignity." That tells me more about your character than any letter of recommendation could." The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to appear any weaker than she already had. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I'll consider your offer." As they crested a small rise, the lights of Sierra Vista came into view, twinkling like earthbound stars in the gathering dusk. The sight brought a rush of emotion to Sarah's throat, relief, hope, and a strange sense of arrival that went beyond the physical journey. "Welcome to Sierra Vista, Mrs. McAllister," Henry said softly. The town was larger than Sarah had expected, sprawling along a wide main street lined with wooden buildings. A proper church stood at one end, its white steeple gleaming in the last light of day. On the opposite end rose the impressive facade of what must be the Continental Hotel, 3 stories of painted clapboard with a wide veranda. Between these anchors stretched the usual frontier businesses: general store, blacksmith, livery, saloon, and what appeared to be a small newspaper office. People moved along the boardwalks, finishing their day's business before full dark. A few glanced up as Henry guided his horse down the main street, and Sarah noted the respectful nods directed his way. Clearly, Henry Cooper was a man of some standing in Sierra Vista. "We'll get you settled at the hotel tonight," Henry said as they approached the building. "Tomorrow you can decide about work." "I can't afford," Sarah began, but Henry cut her off gently. "Consider it an advance on your wages wherever you choose to work. Sierra Vista looks after its own, Mrs. McAllister. And as of mile 29, that includes you and Emma." Before Sarah could protest further, Henry reined his horse to a stop in front of the hotel and dismounted. A young boy ran up from the direction of the livery. "Evening, Mr. Cooper. Want me to take care of Buck for you?" "Thanks, Tommy. Give him a good rub-down and extra oats. He's earned it today." Henry flipped the boy a coin, then turned to help Sarah down. Her legs nearly gave way when her feet touched the ground, and Henry steadied her with a firm hand at her elbow. "Easy now," he murmured. "Let's get you inside." The hotel lobby was modestly elegant, with polished wood floors, a large desk, and several comfortable-looking chairs arranged around a small fireplace. A plump, middle-aged woman looked up from behind the desk, her face lighting with recognition. "Mr. Cooper. We weren't expecting you back from Cheyenne till tomorrow." "Made good time, Mrs. Bridges," Henry replied with a smile. "This is Mrs. Sarah McAllister and her daughter Emma. They'll need a room for the night, your best available, with a hot bath sent up and a meal. Mrs. Bridges's curious gaze swept over Sarah, taking in her trail-worn appearance and the sleeping baby. To her credit, her professional manner never wavered. "Of course, Mr. Cooper. We have a lovely room on the 2nd floor with a proper crib. I'll have Lily prepare it right away." "Thank you," Sarah said, finding her voice at last. "You're very kind." "Not at all, dear," Mrs. Bridges replied warmly. "Any friend of Mr. Cooper's is welcome at the Continental. Lily will bring up some hot water for washing, and I'll have the cook prepare something hearty. You look like you could use a good meal." As if summoned by her name, a young woman appeared from a back room. Mrs. Bridges gave her instructions, and she hurried upstairs to prepare the room. "Mrs. Bridges," Henry said, lowering his voice slightly. "Mrs. McAllister might be interested in employment opportunities here at the hotel. Perhaps you could speak with her about that tomorrow." "Of course." Mrs. Bridges looked pleased. "We're short-handed as it is, what with the stage bringing more travelers through every week." "I'd be happy to discuss positions over breakfast if that suits you, Mrs. McAllister." Sarah nodded gratefully. "That would be wonderful, thank you." Lily reappeared to announce the room was ready. Henry stepped back, seeming suddenly aware of the impropriety of accompanying a widow to her hotel room. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Bridges's capable hands," he said, tipping his hat. "If you need anything, you have only to ask." Sarah shifted Emma to her other arm, the baby still miraculously asleep despite the change in surroundings. "Mr. Cooper, I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary, Mrs. McAllister. I'm just glad our paths crossed when they did." He hesitated, then added, "I'll call tomorrow afternoon to see how you're settling in if that's acceptable," a warmth that had nothing to do with exhaustion spread through Sarah's chest. "That would be fine, Mr. Cooper." With a final nod, Henry departed, leaving Sarah to follow Lily up the stairs to what would be her first proper shelter in days. The room was simple but clean, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a small table with 2 chairs, a washstand, and as promised, a wooden crib. A large window overlooked the main street, now quiet as night settled over Sierra Vista. Lily, a cheerful girl of perhaps 16, helped Sarah bathe and feed Emma first, then left her sleeping peacefully in the crib while Sarah sank into a tub of gloriously hot water behind a screen. The soap smelled of lavender, and Sarah nearly wept at the luxury of being clean for the first time in days. By the time she emerged, dressed in a borrowed nightgown that was too large but blessedly clean, a tray of food awaited on the table: thick stew, fresh bread, apple pie, and a pot of strong tea. Sarah ate slowly, savoring every bite, aware that her stomach might rebel if she rushed after days of near starvation. As she ate, she considered her options. Mrs. Bridges seemed kind, and work at the hotel would provide steady wages, but Henry Cooper's offer lingered in her mind. The ranch would be quieter, perhaps better for Emma, and a cabin of their own would mean privacy and independence. Yet she barely knew the man, however kind he had been on the trail. Too exhausted to make decisions, Sarah finally crawled into bed, the softness of the mattress an almost painful contrast to the hard ground she'd slept on for the past several nights. Emma slumbered peacefully in her crib, her tiny fists curled beside her head. "We made it, sweet girl," Sarah whispered into the darkness. "Mile 30. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, deep and dreamless. Morning arrived with the sound of birdsong and distant church bells. Sarah woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The soft bed, clean sheets, and absence of wind and dust confused her sleep-addled mind until Emma's hungry cry brought everything rushing back. She sat up quickly, wincing at the soreness in her muscles, and went to the crib. "Good morning, my love," she cooed, lifting the baby into her arms. "What a wonderful sound your voice is." After feeding and changing Emma, Sarah dressed in her own clothes, now somewhat cleaner after Lily had taken them to be washed the night before. Her options were limited: a brown skirt, white shirtwaist, and sturdy boots, but they were respectable enough for breakfast with Mrs. Bridges. The hotel dining room was nearly empty when Sarah descended, Emma bundled securely in her arms. Mrs. Bridges waved her over to a table near the window where coffee and pastries awaited. "I hope you slept well, Mrs. McAllister," she said, pouring a cup of coffee for Sarah. "You certainly looked like you needed it when you arrived." "Better than I have in weeks," Sarah admitted, settling Emma on her lap. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Bridges." The older woman waved away her thanks. "Any friend of Henry Cooper's is welcome here. That man has done more for this town than most folks realize." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Did you know he personally financed the schoolhouse? Wouldn't let anyone name it after him either." Sarah's estimation of Henry rose another notch. "He seems a good man." "The best," Mrs. Bridges agreed. "Now about that position. We're in need of a chambermaid primarily, but during busy periods, you'd help in the kitchen and dining room as well. The pay is $15 a month with room and board for you and the little one." It was a fair offer, better than Sarah had expected. What would the hours be like? 6 days a week, sunup to sundown with breaks for meals. Sundays off, of course. We're God-fearing folk here at the Continental. Sarah nodded, mentally calculating. The work would be hard and the hours long, but the security of room and board was appealing. Still, she couldn't help wondering about Emma. Would there be somewhere for Emma during working hours? She's still nursing, so I would need to see to her regularly. Mrs. Bridges's expression faltered slightly. "Well, during your breaks, certainly. And perhaps one of the kitchen girls could watch her when you're working the floors." Though I must say, Mrs. McAllister, a hotel isn't the most suitable environment for an infant." It was a gentle rebuke, but one that struck home. Sarah had known this would be an issue, but hearing it voiced aloud made her heart sink. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Bridges, truly. May I have until this evening to consider? Mr. Cooper mentioned he might call this afternoon." "Of course, dear, Mrs." Bridges patted her hand. "Take your time. The position isn't going anywhere." After breakfast, Sarah returned to her room, her mind whirling with possibilities and concerns. She had no illusions about the difficulties facing a widow with a child in the West. Employment opportunities were limited, and those that existed often made no allowances for motherhood. The hotel position was better than most, but the question of Emma's care weighed heavily on her. She spent the morning in her room, washing clothes in the basin and tending to Emma. The baby seemed to thrive in the clean, warm environment, cooing and reaching for Sarah's face with tiny fingers. These quiet moments were precious soon enough. If she took the hotel position, such time would be scarce. Shortly after the noon hour, a knock at her door announced Lily with a message. Mr. Cooper had arrived and was waiting downstairs in the hotel parlor if Mrs. McAllister was receiving visitors. Sarah's heart quickened inexplicably. She checked her appearance in the small mirror above the washstand, her hair neatly pinned back, her face looking less haggard after a night of proper sleep. "It would have to do. Please tell Mr. Cooper I'll be down directly," she told Lily. Henry stood when Sarah entered the parlor, Emma in her arms. In the clear light of day, she could see him properly for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his clean white shirt. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting a man who smiled often, though his expression now was one of respectful concern. "Mrs. McAllister," he said, stepping forward, "you're looking considerably better today." "A real bed and a hot bath work wonders, Mr. Cooper," Sarah replied with a small smile, "as does being rescued at mile 29. A matching smile tugged at his lips. "How is the little one?" he asked, nodding toward Emma. "Thriving, thanks to you. Please sit down." Sarah gestured to the settee, then took a seat in the armchair opposite. Henry resumed his seat, his hat resting on his knee. "Have you given any thought to your plans?" he asked directly but without pressure. "Mrs. Bridges has offered me a position here at the hotel," Sarah said. "It's generous $15 a month with room and board," Henry nodded. "Clara Bridges is fair. She runs a good establishment." "She is," Sarah agreed. But she hesitated, unsure how to express her concerns without appearing ungrateful. "But you're worried about Emma," Henry finished for her, his perception surprising her. "Hotels aren't ideal for children." "Exactly. Mrs. Bridges was kind but clear that arrangements for Emma during my working hours would be challenging." Henry leaned forward slightly. "My offer still stands, Mrs. McAllister. The cabin is small but comfortable, 2 rooms with its own pump and stove. The main house is just up the hill if you need anything. Mrs. Sullivan, my housekeeper, would be glad for the help, and she loves children. She raised 5 of her own before her husband passed." "What would my duties be?" Sarah asked, practical considerations overriding her hesitation. "Cooking primarily, especially during roundup and branding seasons when we have extra hands. Some cleaning at the main house, mending, that sort of thing. The pay would match the hotel, $15 a month plus the cabin and provisions." It sounded almost too good to be true, which made Sarah wary. "And Emma would be welcome wherever you are, Mrs. Sullivan would be happy to mind her when you're busy, and the ranch is a good place for a child to grow up. Fresh air, animals, space to run when she's older." Sarah studied him, trying to discern his motives. "Mr. Cooper, why are you being so kind to us? You don't know me at all." Henry didn't flinch from her direct question. "I told you yesterday my mother raised me to help those in need, but if you want the whole truth, Mrs. McAllister, I admire courage. What you did, walking all that way with Emma, shows a strength of character that's rare." The ranch could use someone like you." His sincerity was unmistakable, but Sarah had learned the hard way that men's kindness often came with unspoken expectations. "And would there be other duties expected of me, Mr. Cooper?" Henry's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then to something like gentle outrage. "Mrs. McAllister, I assure you my offer is exactly what I've stated: employment, nothing more. You would be under my protection as my employee, but never under any obligation beyond your stated duties." He paused, then added more softly, "I understand your caution. A woman alone faces dangers I can only imagine, but I give you my word as a gentleman, your virtue and privacy would be respected absolutely at the Double C." The vehemence of his response reassured Sarah more than flowery promises might have. She looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully against her chest, then back at Henry Cooper's steadfast gaze. "When would you want us to start?" she asked. Relief and pleasure warmed Henry's expression. "Whenever you're ready. Today, tomorrow, next week the cabin will be waiting." Sarah considered her options one final time. The hotel was in town, with people and society nearby. The ranch would be more isolated but perhaps safer from anyone who might come looking for her from Rawlins. And for Emma's sake, the choice seemed clear. "Tomorrow morning, then," she decided. "If that's acceptable." "More than acceptable, Mrs. McAllister." Henry stood, clearly pleased. "I'll come for you at 9. Is there anything you need in the meantime? Supplies, clothing for yourself or Emma?" Sarah hesitated. Pride warred with practicality. She did need things, especially for the baby, but she had no money to pay for them. As if reading her thoughts, Henry continued, "Consider it an advance on your wages. I can't have my new cook arriving without proper equipment, now can I?" Put that way, it seemed reasonable. Perhaps some fabric for baby clothes and a few necessities from the general store. Done. I'll speak with Tom Wilson at the store and have the items delivered here this afternoon. As Henry prepared to leave, a thought occurred to Sarah. "Mr. Cooper, what will people think? A widow going to work on your ranch, living in a cabin alone." Henry considered this. "People will think you're my employee, Mrs. McAllister. But if you're concerned about gossip, we can make sure Mrs. Sullivan is present when I bring you to the ranch." Proprieties should be observed, especially in a small town. His understanding of her concerns impressed Sarah. Too many men would have dismissed them or worse, used them as leverage. "Thank you," she said simply. "Until tomorrow, then." Henry tipped his hat and departed, his long strides carrying him swiftly from the parlor. Left alone, Sarah looked down at her sleeping daughter. "Well, Emma," she whispered, "it seems we've found our mile 30. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of small activities. True to his word, Henry arranged for deliveries from the general store: fabric, thread, a small sewing kit, baby linens, a few personal items for Sarah, and even a sturdy carpet bag for their belongings. Mrs. Bridges helped her make selections from the hotel's lost and found for additional clothing, including a warm shawl that had gone unclaimed for months. By evening, Sarah felt more prepared than she had since fleeing Rawlins. She spent the evening sewing simple garments for Emma, the familiar work soothing her anxieties about the next day. Morning arrived clear and bright. Sarah dressed carefully in her best clothes, still shabby but clean, and packed their meager belongings into the new carpet bag. Emma seemed to sense the importance of the day, gurgling happily as Sarah wrapped her in a fresh blanket. Henry arrived precisely at 9, driving a small wagon rather than riding horseback. Mrs. Sullivan, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes and capable hands, sat beside him on the driver's seat. "Mrs. McAllister," Henry said, climbing down to help her into the wagon. "This is Mrs. Abigail Sullivan, my housekeeper and, truth be told, the real authority at the Double C." Mrs. Sullivan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Don't you believe a word of it, Mrs. McAllister. This boy runs a tight ship. He just lets me think I'm in charge now and then to keep me happy." Their easy rapport reassured Sarah immediately. This was not the stilted formality of employer and servant, but the comfortable respect of people who work together as a team. "I'm pleased to meet you, Mrs. Sullivan," Sarah said as Henry helped her into the wagon. "And please call me Sarah." "Then you must call me Abby," the older woman replied, making room on the seat. "And who is this beautiful little one?" "This is Emma," Sarah said, settling the baby on her lap. "May I?" Abby asked, holding out her arms. Something in her expression, a grandmother's longing, perhaps made Sarah hand Emma over without hesitation. The baby regarded Abby solemnly for a moment, then broke into a gummy smile that made the older woman laugh with delight. "Oh, she's going to be a heartbreaker, this one," Abby declared, bouncing Emma gently. "Reminds me of my Mary at this age." Henry climbed back onto the driver's seat and took up the reins. "Ladies, if you're ready." With that, they set off down the main street of Sierra Vista, drawing curious glances from townsfolk going about their morning business. Sarah felt their eyes on her, wondering, speculating, but for once she didn't mind. Let them look. She had nothing to hide and everything to gain. The journey to the Double C Ranch took just over an hour, following the main road south, before turning west onto a well-maintained track that wound through rolling hills. As they crested a final rise, the ranch spread out before them in the valley below a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals, and in the distance, vast pastures where cattle grazed under the watchful eyes of mounted cowboys. "Welcome to the Double C," Henry said, a note of pride in his voice. Sarah couldn't help but be impressed. This was no modest operation but a substantial enterprise, larger and more prosperous than she had imagined. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. Henry guided the wagon down the hill toward the main house. As they approached, Sarah noted the careful maintenance of the buildings, the neat fencing, the well-swept yard. Everything spoke of attention to detail and pride in ownership. "The cabin's just over there," Henry said, pointing to a small structure nestled beneath a stand of cottonwoods about 100 yards from the main house. "We'll get you settled there first, then I can show you around the rest of the place." The cabin proved to be exactly as Henry had described, small but well-built, with 2 rooms, a front room that served as kitchen and living area, and a bedroom just large enough for a bed and cradle. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the front room, and windows let in ample light. Someone had been there ahead of them. The fireplace was laid ready to light, fresh linens adorned the bed, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the small table. "Abby insisted on the flowers," Henry explained, noticing Sarah's surprise. "Said every home needs something beautiful to welcome new residents." "It's perfect," Sarah said, emotion thickening her voice. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, the simple comfort of the cabin felt like an unimaginable luxury. Henry carried in her carpet bag while Abby showed Sarah the pump on the back porch and explained how the stove worked. "I've left some provisions in the cupboard," she said. "Enough to get you through a few days until you can come up to the main house and see what we need for the kitchen there." "Thank you," Sarah said, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness. "I don't know what to say." Abby patted her arm. "No need for words, dear. We're just glad to have you here." She turned to Henry. "I'll take the little one up to the house with me while you show Sarah around, if that's all right. Give her a chance to get her bearings without juggling a baby." Sarah hesitated, not having been separated from Emma since her birth. Henry noticed her uncertainty. "The house is just up the hill, Sarah. You'll be able to see it from anywhere on the ranch, and Abby raised 5 children of her own. Emma will be safe with her." "Of course," Sarah said, forcing herself to relax. "It's just, you haven't been apart from her," Abby finished gently. "I understand completely, but you'll work better if you know she's cared for, and I promise to bring her straight back if she needs you." With that reassurance, Sarah carefully handed Emma to Abby, along with instructions about her feeding and preferences. The older woman listened patiently, then shooed them out with a smile. "Go on now. Emma and I will get acquainted while you learn your way around." Outside, Henry offered Sarah his arm, a formal gesture that nonetheless felt natural. "Shall we start with the main house? You'll be spending most of your time there." The tour took the better part of an hour. The main house was larger than it appeared from the outside, with a spacious kitchen that clearly served as the heart of the operation. Upstairs were bedrooms Henry's at one end of the hall, a study adjacent to it, and several guest rooms that were rarely used except during family visits. Downstairs, in addition to the kitchen and dining room, was a comfortable sitting room with bookshelves lining one wall. "You're welcome to borrow any books that interest you," Henry said, noticing Sarah's gaze lingering on the shelves. "My mother was a great reader and insisted on bringing her library west when they settled here." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Sarah said, running her fingers along the spines of the volumes. "She was," Henry agreed, a touch of sadness in his voice. "She would have liked you, I think." From the main house, they proceeded to the outbuildings barn, smithy, bunkhouse where the ranch hands slept, cookhouse where they took their meals during busy seasons. Sarah met a few of the men as they passed, each tipping his hat respectfully at Henry's introduction. "And that's Mitch, my foreman," Henry said as a stocky, weather-beaten man approached from the corral. "He runs the day-to-day operations when I'm away on business." Mitch greeted Sarah with gruff politeness, eyeing her curiously but asking no questions. She appreciated his restraint, sensing that gossip would be minimal at the Double C by the time they returned to the main house. Sarah felt both overwhelmed and oddly at home. The ranch operated like a small, well-organized community, each person with their role to play in its success. "It's impressive," she told Henry as they climbed the steps to the porch. "You've built something remarkable here." "My father started it," Henry said modestly. "I've just tried to honor his vision." Inside, they found Abby in the kitchen, Emma contentedly sleeping in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a wooden box lined with soft blankets. "She's an angel," Abby reported. "Barely fussed at all after you left." Relief washed over Sarah. If Emma could adjust so easily to Abby's care, perhaps this arrangement would work after all. "Thank you for watching her." "My pleasure entirely," Abby assured her. "Now, let me show you around the kitchen before lunch. You'll be taking over cooking duties starting tomorrow, but today you're our guest." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of information where supplies were kept, how many men to cook for during regular operations versus roundup, which cowboys had particular preferences or allergies. Sarah listened attentively, mentally cataloging everything for future reference. By the time she and Emma returned to their cabin that evening, her head was spinning with details, but her heart was lighter than it had been in months. She lit the stove and prepared a simple meal from the provisions Abby had left, then fed and bathed Emma in the small tin tub that had appeared mysteriously by the hearth. As darkness fell, she lit the oil lamp and sat in the single rocking chair, Emma drowsing against her shoulder. "Well, my love," she whispered, "it seems we've found a place to catch our breath. Let's make the most of it, shall we?" The coming weeks established a routine that was demanding but rewarding. Sarah rose before dawn to feed Emma, then walked up to the main house to start breakfast for the ranch hands. Abby would arrive shortly after, taking charge of Emma while Sarah worked. Mornings were spent cooking, cleaning, and planning the day's meals. Afternoons often included mending, laundry, or helping Abby with various household tasks. Despite the long hours, Sarah found herself thriving. The physical labor was nothing compared to the 30-mile journey that had brought her to Sierra Vista, and the satisfaction of contributing to the well-running household gave her a sense of purpose she had sorely missed. Emma, too, seemed to flourish in the ranch environment, growing plump and increasingly vocal under the doting attention of Abby and the occasional cooing ranch hand who would peek at her when they thought no one was looking. Henry proved to be an attentive but unobtrusive employer. He often joined the men for meals, but made a point of complimenting Sarah's cooking without singling her out for special attention. When they did speak privately, it was with a growing ease that surprised Sarah. Henry was educated but unpretentious, capable of discussing everything from cattle breeding to literature with equal enthusiasm. One evening, About 3 weeks after Sarah's arrival, Henry stopped by her cabin just as she was putting Emma down for the night. His knock was gentle, and when Sarah opened the door, he stood respectfully on the porch, hat in hand. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, "but I wanted to let you know I'll be leaving for Cheyenne tomorrow. Business at the bank that can't wait. How long will you be gone?" Sarah asked, surprised by her own disappointment at the news. "A week, perhaps 2. Mitch knows how to reach me if there's any trouble here." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to make sure you and Emma have everything you need before I go." "We're fine, thank you." Sarah smiled, touched by his concern. "Abby has been teaching me to make preserves from the last of the summer berries. We'll be quite busy while you're away." Henry nodded, seeming relieved. "Good, that's good." He turned to go, then paused. "Sarah, I've been meaning to ask, are you happy here?" At the Double C, the unexpected question caught her off guard, but her answer came without hesitation. "Yes, Henry, happier than I thought possible after James died." Something flickered in his eyes at the mention of her husband, a shadow quickly controlled. "I'm glad," he said simply. "Good night, then. I'll see you before I leave in the morning." As he walked back toward the main house, Sarah watched him go, a curious warmth spreading through her chest. In just 3 weeks, Henry Cooper had become more than an employer. He was, perhaps, becoming a friend. Henry's absence stretched to nearly 3 weeks, during which time the first snows of autumn dusted the hills around the Double C. Sarah settled deeper into ranch life, her cooking drawing increasingly appreciative comments from the hands. Emma began to sit up on her own, a development that was celebrated as a major achievement by everyone from Abby to grizzled old Pete, who had worked the ranch since Henry's father's time. When Henry finally returned, it was late in the evening, long after most of the ranch had retired. Sarah, unable to sleep due to Emma's teething fussiness, was walking the floor of their cabin when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Peering out the window, she recognized Henry's distinctive silhouette as he dismounted and led his horse toward the barn. Without thinking, she wrapped Emma in a blanket and stepped outside. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. She stood on the porch, watching as Henry emerged from the barn and started toward the main house. He spotted her almost immediately, changing course to approach her cabin. "Sarah, is everything all right?" he called softly. "Everything's fine," she assured him. "Emma's having a rough night with her first tooth, that's all. I saw you ride in and wanted to welcome you home." Home. The word hung between them, simple yet laden with meaning. Henry climbed the steps to the porch, his features becoming clearer in the spill of lamplight from the window. He looked tired, with several days' growth of beard darkening his jaw, but his eyes warmed at the sight of Emma bundled in Sarah's arms. "May I?" he asked, reaching out tentatively. Sarah handed Emma to him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Henry cradled the baby with surprising skill, murmuring softly to her. Emma, who had been fussing continuously for hours, quieted almost immediately, regarding Henry with solemn interest. "She remembers you," Sarah said, surprised. "I should hope so." Henry smiled down at the baby. "We had quite a conversation about horse breeding the day before I left. Didn't we, Miss Emma?" Sarah laughed, the sound carrying in the still night air. "I'm sure she had many insightful contributions." "The most astute," Henry agreed seriously, though his eyes danced with humor. "She favors the Morgan bloodline, apparently." As they stood together on the small porch, Emma drifting toward sleep in Henry's arms, Sarah felt a profound contentment wash over her. This moment, simple, unplanned, inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, felt more like home than anything she had experienced since before James died. "How was your trip?" she asked, reluctant to end the moment. "Productive. Exhausting." Henry shifted Emma to his shoulder, patting her back gently. "I secured a contract to supply beef to the army post near Laramie. It's a good opportunity for the ranch." "Congratulations," Sarah said warmly. "That's wonderful news." Henry nodded, his expression turning more serious. "There was something else. While I was in Cheyenne, I made some inquiries about Rollins mining and ore. Sarah's heart stuttered. Why would you do that? Because I wanted to know what kind of men would threaten a widow and her child, Henry said, his voice hardening. It seems they have a reputation for such tactics. The territorial governor is aware of complaints, but so far, nothing has been done. He paused, then added gently, I wanted to be sure you and Emma were truly safe here. The concern behind his actions touched Sarah deeply, even as it reawakened her fears. Did anyone ask why you were inquiring? No, I was discreet. I have business interests throughout the territory. Questions about other companies aren't unusual. He met her gaze directly. Sarah, I believe you're safe at the Double C, but I thought you should know that Rollins Mining has a representative in Sierra Vista, occasionally a man named Garrett who handles their timber purchases. The name sent ice through Sarah's veins. Thomas Garrett, tall man with a scar on his chin. Henry's expression darkened. You know him. He was one of the men who came to our house after James died. Sarah hugged herself against a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He was the one who suggested other arrangements for the rent. Emma stirred at the tension in Sarah's voice, whimpering softly. Henry soothed her automatically, his focus still on Sarah. He won't bother you here, Sarah. No one at the Double C would give him information about you, and he has no reason to come to the ranch. But if he sees me in town, I'll make sure you're never in town when he's expected, Henry promised. And if by chance your paths cross, you'll have me or one of my men with you. I give you my word. His vehemence reassured her, as did the protective way he held Emma, now sleeping soundly against his shoulder. Thank you, Henry, not just for this, but for everything, taking us in, giving us work, treating us with such kindness. It's nothing less than you deserve, Henry said quietly. What you did walking those 30 miles with Emma, it showed extraordinary courage. I admire that more than I can say. Something in his voice, in the intensity of his gaze, made Sarah's breath catch. For a fleeting moment, she saw not just kindness in his eyes, but a deeper emotion that both thrilled and terrified her. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Emma sighed in her sleep, breaking the spell. I should put her to bed, Sarah said, holding out her arms. Henry gently transferred the sleeping baby, his hands lingering perhaps a second longer than necessary. Of course, it's late and you both need your rest. He stepped back, the proper employer once more. Good night, Sarah. I'm glad to be home. Good night, Henry, she replied softly. We're glad you're back. As she watched him walk toward the main house, Sarah acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Henry Cooper. The realization should have frightened her. It was too soon after James's death, too complicated given their employer-employee relationship, too risky with her uncertain past. Yet as she laid Emma in her cradle and returned to her own bed, Sarah found herself not afraid but hopeful. Perhaps, just maybe, she had been guided to mile 29 for a reason greater than mere survival. With that thought warming her heart, she finally drifted off to sleep. The weeks following Henry's return brought a subtle shift in the atmosphere at the Double C. Nothing overt changed in Sarah and Henry's interactions. He remained respectful. She professional, but a new awareness hummed beneath their conversations. Charged silences and lingering glances communicating what neither was ready to voice aloud. Winter descended on Wyoming with characteristic ferocity, blanketing the ranch in deep snow and keeping everyone close to home. Christmas approached, bringing a flurry of preparations to the main house. Abby supervised the decorating with cheerful authority, enlisting Sarah's help in baking special treats for the hands and creating simple ornaments for the pine tree Henry and Mitch dragged in from the hills. We always have a proper Christmas at the Double C, Abby explained as they hung paper stars and strings of dried berries on the tree. Mr. Cooper's mother started the tradition, and he's kept it going. There'll be gifts for everyone, a special dinner and singing afterward. It sounds wonderful, Sarah said, trying to remember the last time she had celebrated properly. Last Christmas had been meager, with James working extra shifts at the mine and little money for gifts. It is, Abby agreed, her eyes twinkling. And this year will be even more special with little Emma's first Christmas. The week before Christmas, a heavy snowstorm swept through the valley, making travel impossible and effectively isolating the ranch. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Henry stamped in, brushing snow from his coat and hat. "It's getting worse," he reported, warming his hands by the stove. "I've sent the men to check on the cattle in the south pasture, but they won't be back until morning. We'll need to keep the fires going all night." "Will they be safe out there?" Sarah asked, concerned. "They know what they're doing," Henry assured her. "Mitch has weathered worse storms than this." He glanced around the kitchen. "Where's Emma?" with Abby in the sitting room. "She's been fussy today. I think another tooth is coming in." As if on cue, Emma's wails echoed from the other room. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron, preparing to go to her daughter, but Henry stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "I'll go," he said. "You finished dinner." Before Sarah could protest, he was gone, his deep voice soon rumbling soothingly in the next room. Emma's cries subsided almost immediately. When Sarah went to check a few minutes later, she found Henry seated in an armchair by the fire, Emma on his lap. He was reading to her from a book of children's stories, his voice soft and animated as he described the adventures of a clever rabbit. Abby sat nearby, her knitting needles clicking contentedly. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so achingly like the family life Sarah had once dreamed of, that tears pricked at her eyes. She retreated silently to the kitchen, not wanting to interrupt the moment. That evening, after the ranch hands had been fed and Emma put to bed in the cradle that now permanently resided in a corner of the main house kitchen, Henry asked Sarah to join him in the sitting room. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you," he said, his manner more formal than usual. Sarah followed him, curious and slightly apprehensive. The sitting room was warm and inviting, the Christmas tree glowing with candles carefully placed among its branches. Henry gestured for her to take a seat on the sofa, then poured 2 small glasses of sherry from a decanter on the sideboard. "You're not in the habit of drinking, I know," he said, offering her one of the glasses, "but I thought perhaps a small toast might be in order, to surviving your first Wyoming blizzard." Sarah accepted the glass with a smile. "It's hardly my first snowstorm, Henry. Pennsylvania has its share of winter weather." "But not like this," Henry said, taking a seat across from her. "This is Wyoming showing its teeth. You'll see worse before spring." They sipped their sherry in companionable silence for a moment, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Sarah found herself studying Henry's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth. In firelight, with his guard somewhat lowered, he looked younger, less the responsible rancher and more the man beneath the role. "What did you want to discuss?" she finally asked, setting her barely touched sherry aside. Henry placed his own glass on the table between them, his expression turning serious. "Christmas," he said. "Or more specifically, Christmas gifts." This was not what Sarah had expected. "Oh, I know you haven't had the opportunity to go into town since the weather turned," Henry continued. "And I thought you might be concerned about gifts for Emma." The kindness of his thinking touched Sarah deeply. It was true she had been worrying about Emma's first Christmas, wanting it to be special despite their circumstances. "That's very considerate of you, Henry." "I've taken the liberty of setting aside some things," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice now. "Nothing elaborate, a cloth doll Abby made, some wooden blocks my father carved for me when I was small, but I wanted to check with you first. I don't want to overstep." Sarah was momentarily speechless, moved beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Henry, that's incredibly kind. Of course I don't mind. Emma will love them." Relief washed over his features. "Good, that's good." He hesitated, then added more softly, "And there's something for you as well, nothing extravagant, but, well, you'll see on Christmas morning." Before Sarah could respond, Abby appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Mr. Cooper, Pete just came in from checking the barn. He says there's a problem with the roof over the new stalls, the snow's causing it to sag dangerously." Henry rose immediately, the intimate moment broken. "I'd better see to it. Excuse me, Sarah." Left alone in the sitting room, Sarah looked at the beautiful tree, the comfortable furnishings, the evidence everywhere of a home well loved and carefully maintained. For the first time since coming to the Double C, she allowed herself to imagine not just staying but belonging, not as an employee, but as something more permanent. The thought both exhilarated and terrified her. Christmas morning dawned clear and brilliantly cold. The storm had passed, leaving a world transformed, pristine white drifts sculpted by the wind, trees encased in glittering ice, the sky a dome of flawless blue. Sarah woke early, excitement fluttering in her stomach as she dressed Emma in the special gown she had sewn from fabric Henry had provided. "Your first Christmas, my love," she whispered, kissing Emma's plump cheek. "What a blessed day." They made their way through the snow to the main house, where the aroma of cinnamon and coffee greeted them. Abby was already in the kitchen, a wreath of holly pinned to her gray hair in celebration of the day. "Merry Christmas, dears," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Don't you look festive? Come in, come in. The men will be in from the bunkhouse soon, and Mr. Cooper is just finishing up in the barn." The day unfolded like a cherished ritual. After a hearty breakfast, everyone gathered in the sitting room for the exchange of gifts. The ranch hands received practical items: new gloves, warm socks, tobacco pouches, along with pies and cookies Sarah and Abby had prepared. To Sarah's surprise, the men had gifts for her as well: a beautiful hand-carved wooden box from Pete, a set of hair combs from Mitch, small tokens from the others that spoke of their acceptance and appreciation. Emma was the center of attention, cooing delightedly at the cloth doll and attempting to chew on the wooden blocks. Henry watched from his armchair, his expression one of quiet satisfaction as the baby crawled from person to person, collecting admiration and gentle touches. When the time came for Henry's gift to Sarah, he seemed almost nervous, rising from his chair to retrieve a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "This is for you," he said simply, placing it in her hands. Sarah unwrapped it carefully, conscious of all eyes upon her. Inside was a small leather-bound book of poetry, Tennyson, one of her favorites. But as she opened the cover, something else caught her eye: a delicate gold chain with a small pendant in the shape of a star. "Henry," she breathed, lifting the necklace carefully. "It's beautiful." "Open the pendant," he instructed softly. With trembling fingers, Sarah found the tiny latch. Inside was a lock of Emma's hair, carefully preserved. "I noticed you cutting a curl when she had her first haircut," Henry explained, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I thought you might want to keep it close to your heart." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, not just for the thoughtfulness of the gift but for the man who had given it, who had noticed such a small, maternal gesture and understood its significance. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more. Henry nodded, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hand for the necklace. Sarah turned, allowing him to fasten it around her neck, acutely aware of his fingers brushing against her skin, of the collective gaze of the ranch hands, of Abby's knowing smile. When she faced him again, something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of feelings that could no longer be hidden behind the pretense of employer and employee. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of celebration, a magnificent dinner. Singing around the piano Henry's mother had insisted on bringing west decades earlier. Stories and laughter that stretched into the evening. Through it all, Sarah was conscious of Henry's presence, his attention divided between his responsibilities as host and his evident desire to be near her and Emma. As the party wound down and the hands returned to the bunkhouse, Sarah prepared to take a sleeping Emma back to their cabin. Henry intercepted her at the door, his expression serious in the lamplight. "Let me walk you home," he said, already reaching for his coat. "The path might be slippery." Outside, the world was transformed again, moonlight turning the snow to silver, stars scattered across the black velvet of the sky. They walked in silence, Henry carrying Emma bundled against the cold, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. At the cabin door, Sarah turned to take her daughter, but Henry hesitated. "Sarah, there's something I need to say." The intensity in his voice made her heart quicken. "Yes, these past months, having you and Emma here, it's changed things, changed me." He shifted Emma gently in his arms, his gaze never leaving Sarah's face. "I know it's too soon, that you're still grieving James, that there are 100 reasons why I shouldn't speak. But today, watching you with Emma, with the men, with Abby, I couldn't keep silent any longer." Sarah stood very still, afraid that any movement might break the spell of this moment, this confession. "What are you saying, Henry?" "I'm saying that I care for you, Sarah, more than as my cook, more than as my employee. I care for you in a way I never expected to care for anyone." He drew a deep breath. "I'm not asking for anything, I know you need time, but I wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here, for both of you." The words hung in the cold air between them, honest and unadorned. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a lightness that had been absent for so long she had almost forgotten its existence. "Henry," she said softly, "I care for you too, more than I thought possible after James, but you're right, I do need time. Emma needs stability, we both do." "And you'll have it," Henry promised. "Nothing needs to change, take all the time you need, just know that my feelings are here waiting whenever you're ready to accept them." Sarah reached out impulsively, placing her hand against his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For finding us at mile 29, for bringing us here, for giving us a home." Henry turned his face slightly, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm, a gesture so tender, so respectful, yet so full of promise that Sarah's breath caught. "Merry Christmas, Sarah," he said, carefully transferring Emma back to her arms. "Merry Christmas, Henry," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. As she watched him walk back toward the main house, Sarah felt a certainty settle over her like a blanket. Whatever the future held, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Spring came to Wyoming in fits and starts warm days that melted the snow into rushing streams, followed by fierce squalls that recoated the world in white. By April, however, the land had committed to renewal, wildflowers pushing through the soil in sheltered valleys, green shoots appearing in pastures where cattle now grazed freely. Life at the Double C settled into a rhythm marked by the seasons and the demands of the ranch. Sarah continued her duties as cook and housekeeper, but her role had expanded subtly over the winter months. She now helped with the accounts, her neat handwriting and facility with numbers proving valuable during Henry's increasingly frequent business trips. Emma, now crawling energetically and pulling herself up on furniture, became the darling of the ranch, her sunny disposition and ready smile winning over even the most grizzled cowboys. True to his word, Henry had not pressed Sarah for any declaration or commitment following their Christmas Eve conversation. He remained unfailingly respectful, their interactions warm but proper. Yet Sarah was acutely aware of the current that ran beneath their everyday exchanges, the lingering glances, the brush of fingers when passing a dish at dinner, the way his expression softened when he watched her with Emma. For her part, Sarah had spent the winter examining her heart, her grief for James gradually transforming from a raw wound to a gentle ache. She would always love him, always honor his memory as Emma's father. But she had come to understand that loving Henry didn't diminish that love had existed alongside it, different but equally valid. The question that remained was whether she was ready to act on her feelings, to risk her heart and Emma's future on a new beginning. The answer came on a warm May afternoon as Sarah worked in the small garden she had started behind her cabin. Emma sat nearby on a blanket, happily stacking and knocking over the wooden blocks that had been her Christmas gift. The peaceful domesticity of the moment was interrupted by the sound of galloping hooves approaching from the direction of town. Sarah looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, to see a rider coming hard down the track toward the main house. Something about the urgency of his approach sent a chill through her. Scooping up Emma, she hurried toward the house, arriving just as the rider dismounted and called for Henry. It was Tommy Wilson, the livery boy from Sierra Vista, his young face flushed with exertion and excitement. "Mr. Cooper," he shouted as Henry emerged from the barn. "Pa sent me to warn you. There's men in town asking about a widow with a baby saying she stole from their company back in Rawlins." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Henry's gaze shot to her, his expression hardening. "Who are these men, Tommy?" "3 of them," the boy reported breathlessly. "Mean-looking sorts. One's tall with a scar on his chin, says his name is Garrett. They're showing a paper saying she's wanted for theft. Pa didn't believe him, but they've been asking all over town." Thomas Garrett. The name sent ice through Sarah's veins. She clutched Emma tighter, the baby squirming at the sudden tension in her mother's body. Henry's voice remained calm, though Sarah could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. "Did anyone tell them about Sarah?" Tommy shook his head vigorously. "No, sir. Pa told him he ain't seen no widow fitting that description. Mrs. Bridges at the hotel said the same, but they're staying overnight, planning to ask around the outlying farms tomorrow." "Thank you, Tommy. You did right to come warn us." Henry fished in his pocket, producing a silver dollar that he pressed into the boy's hand. "Ride back and tell your pa I'm grateful. If those men ask about the double C, tell him to say I've been hiring only men this season, no women." As Tommy remounted and galloped back toward town, Henry turned to Sarah, his expression grave. "Let's get inside. We need to talk." In the kitchen, Abby took one look at Sarah's pale face and Henry's grim expression and immediately reached for Emma. "I'll take the little one upstairs for her nap," she said, understanding without being told that serious matters needed discussion. When they were alone, Sarah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "They've found me," she whispered, "after all this time." Henry remained standing, his body taut with controlled anger. "They're claiming you stole from the company." Sarah looked up, indignation momentarily replacing fear. "I took nothing that wasn't rightfully mine. James's pocket watch, our personal belongings, the wages they still owed him after his death, those were mine by right." "Of course they were," Henry agreed, his voice softening. "But they're using the theft accusation as an excuse to find you. The question is why?" "What do they really want after all this time?" Sarah shuddered, remembering Thomas Garrett's cold eyes, the way he had looked at her in the cramped company house after James's death. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Perhaps they simply can't abide the thought that someone defied them. Or perhaps," she hesitated, a terrible thought occurring to her. "James was organizing the miners, trying to form an association for better conditions. Before he died, he told me he had evidence of safety violations, of bribes paid to inspectors. His papers disappeared after his death. I assumed the company took them. But what if they think I have them?" Henry's expression darkened further. "That would explain their persistence. Documents like that could cause significant trouble for a company like Rawlins Mining." He paced the length of the kitchen, thinking aloud. "They won't find you here, the town will protect you. Tommy's warning proves that, but we can't risk them expanding their search to the ranch." "What should I do?" Sarah asked, hating the tremor in her voice but unable to suppress it. Henry stopped pacing, his decision apparently made. "We have 2 options. Either you and Emma hide somewhere on the ranch until they give up and leave the area, or—" he hesitated, meeting her gaze directly, "or we give them a reason to stop looking for a widow named Sarah McAllister." Sarah's breath caught as his meaning became clear. "Henry, are you suggesting marriage?" he confirmed, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was proposing. "If you were Mrs. Cooper, wife of a prominent rancher, not a widow recently arrived from Rawlins, they'd have no reason to connect you to the woman they're seeking." The word hung in the air between them, fraught with implications far beyond its practical purpose as a shield from danger. Sarah struggled to process the suggestion, her thoughts whirling chaotically. "Henry, I can't ask you to do that. It would be a deception, a sham, would it?" He interrupted gently, coming to kneel beside her chair. "Sarah, I told you at Christmas how I feel about you, about Emma. Those feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've grown stronger. I had planned to wait, to give you all the time you needed to be certain of your own heart, but circumstances have forced our hand." He took her trembling fingers in his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm not proposing merely as a solution to a problem. I'm proposing because I love you, and I believe we could build a good life together, the three of us." Love. He had never used the word before, not even during their Christmas conversation. Hearing it now in this context made Sarah's heart race with a mixture of fear and joy. "But marriage is sacred," she protested weakly. "It shouldn't be entered into for protection or convenience." "No, it shouldn't," Henry agreed. "Which is why I'm asking you to search your heart right now and tell me truthfully. Do you believe you could ever love me as I love you? Not as a replacement for James, but as the man I am." Sarah looked into his eyes, steady, honest eyes that had never lied to her, and found her answer waiting there, had perhaps known it for months. "I already do," she whispered. "I love you, Henry Cooper. I think I have since that day on the trail when you found us at mile 29. The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then all at once dazzling. "Then marry me, Sarah. Not just to protect you from Garrett and his men, but because we love each other. Because Emma deserves a father who will cherish her as his own. Because life is too short and too precious to waste a single day we could spend together as a family." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but they were tears of wonder rather than sorrow. "Yes," she said simply. "I will marry you, Henry." His smile was radiant as he leaned forward to press a gentle, almost reverent kiss to her lips there first, a seal on a promise that transcended the immediate danger and reached toward a shared future. When they parted, practicality reasserted itself. "But how?" Sarah asked. "Even if we decided this minute, it would take time to arrange a proper wedding. Those men are already in town." Henry's expression turned thoughtful. "Not necessarily. Judge Wilson, Tommy's grandfather, is visiting from Laramie. He's staying with Tom at the general store. As a circuit judge, he has the authority to perform marriages anywhere in the territory." A smile touched his lips. "And I happen to know he owes me a favor." "You want to get married today?" Sarah asked, stunned by the speed of events. "I want to make you my wife before Thomas Garrett can cause any more fear or pain in your life," Henry replied firmly. "The celebration, the party, the church blessing, those can come later when the danger has passed. What matters now is making our union legal and known." Sarah considered his words, surprised to find herself nodding in agreement. After all, wasn't this how life on the frontier often proceeded? Practical decisions made swiftly, ceremonies secondary to substance. "All right," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "Let's get married today." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Henry rode into town himself, returning with not only Judge Wilson but also Reverend Taylor from the Sierra Vista Church. "For appearances," he explained to Sarah, "and because I know your faith is important to you. The judge will perform the legal ceremony, but the Reverend can give a blessing afterward." Abby, overjoyed at the news despite its precipitous nature, took charge of preparations. She insisted Sarah wear her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranged Emma in a white gown trimmed with lace. From a chest in the attic came treasures long stored away: a lace veil that had belonged to Henry's mother, a pair of pearl earrings, a small bouquet of silk flowers that looked remarkably fresh. "I've been saving these for years," Abby confided as she helped Sarah dress. "Always hoped Mr. Cooper would find someone worthy of them. Should have known it would take a woman who walked 30 miles with a baby on her back to capture his heart." By late afternoon, the The sitting room of the Double C had been transformed into a wedding chapel of sorts. The ranch hands, scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday best, stood awkwardly along one wall. Judge Wilson, a dignified man with silver hair and kind eyes, waited before the fireplace with Henry, who looked both nervous and exultant in his black suit. As Sarah entered with Emma in her arms and Abby at her side, the room fell silent. Henry's expression as he beheld his bride and her daughter was one Sarah would remember for the rest of her days: awe, love, and a fierce protectiveness that made her feel both cherished and safe. The ceremony itself was brief, but deeply moving. Judge Wilson spoke of the sanctity of marriage, the responsibilities of husband and wife, the commitment being made not just to each other but to Emma as well. When it came time for the vows, Henry's voice rang out clear and unwavering as he promised to love, honor, and protect Sarah all the days of his life. Sarah's own voice trembled slightly, but her conviction was absolute as she made the same promises in return. When Henry slipped a ring onto her finger, his mother's, Abby whispered later the simple gold band felt right, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming," Judge Wilson pronounced, "I now declare you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Henry's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled ranch hands. Emma, caught between her parents, gurgled happily, reaching up to pat Henry's cheek as if giving her own blessing to the union. Reverend Taylor stepped forward then, offering a prayer of blessing on the new family, his words focusing on the divine providence that had brought them together. "For surely," he concluded, "it was no mere chance that led Mr. Cooper to find his bride at mile 29 of her journey. Such meetings are arranged in heaven long before they occur on earth." The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, a special dinner prepared by Abby, a small cake, gifts hastily assembled by the hands, mostly practical items, though Pete presented Sarah with another of his beautiful carvings, this time a pair of horses standing side by side. Throughout the evening, Sarah was conscious of a growing sense of rightness, of completion. The hasty nature of the ceremony, the practical considerations that had precipitated it, these faded in importance against the reality of Henry's steady presence at her side, his hand occasionally finding hers, his smile when their eyes met across the room. As darkness fell and the celebration wound down, Henry whispered in Sarah's ear, "Mrs. Sullivan has moved Emma's things to the main bedroom. She'll watch over her tonight while we stay in your cabin. I hope that meets with your approval." The implication was clear: their marriage would be a true one in every sense beginning tonight. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, but she met his gaze steadily. "It does, husband." The word felt strange on her tongue, yet somehow perfect. Henry's eyes darkened at the sound of it, his hand tightening momentarily on hers. They slipped away shortly thereafter, walking the familiar path to the cabin that had been Sarah's home for months and would now serve as their bridal chamber. The night was clear and mild, stars scattered across the velvet sky, the scent of spring flowers perfuming the air. At the door, Henry paused, then swept Sarah into his arms in a single fluid motion. "Tradition demands it," he explained with a smile as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, Sarah was surprised to find the cabin transformed. Fresh linens adorned the bed, wildflowers filled every available container, and candles cast a warm, intimate glow over the simple room. A bottle of wine and 2 glasses stood on the small table, alongside a plate of cheese and fruit. "Abby," Henry said by way of explanation as he set Sarah gently on her feet. "She's a romantic at heart, though she'd never admit it." "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, suddenly shy despite the months of growing feelings between them. This step from friendship to physical intimacy felt momentous, sacred. Henry seemed to sense her nervousness. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to her before raising his own in a toast. "To my bride," he said softly, "the bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known." Sarah sipped the wine, its warmth spreading through her veins, helping to calm her fluttering nerves. "To my husband," she countered, "who found us at mile 29 and changed our lives forever." They drank in silence for a moment, the weight of the day's events settling around them like a mantle. Then Henry set aside his glass and held out his hand to her. "Dance with me," he said simply. "There's no music," Sarah pointed out, though she placed her own glass on the table and moved into his arms without hesitation. "We'll make our own," Henry murmured, beginning to hum softly as he guided her in a slow circle around the small room. Sarah recognized the tune "Beautiful Dreamer," a song her father had often played on his fiddle back in Pennsylvania. The melody, combined with the gentle sway of their bodies and the warmth of Henry's arms around her, melted away the last of her nervousness. When the improvised dance ended, Henry cupped her face in his hands, his eyes serious despite the smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I want you to know something, Sarah. Whatever brought us to this moment, danger, circumstance, fate, what matters now is that we're here together. I love you, not just because you needed me or because you're Emma's mother, but for who you are. The woman who walked 30 miles with a baby on her back. The woman who rebuilt her life from ashes. The woman who brings joy and purpose to everything she touches." He paused, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks. "I would have waited forever if that's what you needed. I want you to be certain of that." Sarah's heart swelled with emotion so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "I am certain," she whispered, "certain that I love you. Certain that this is right, despite the circumstances that hastened it. Certain that you are the man I want to spend my life with, raise my daughter with, grow old beside." His kiss then was different from those that had come before, deeper, more urgent, a promise of the intimacy to come. Sarah responded with equal fervor, her body arching against his, months of carefully controlled feelings finally finding expression. Later, much later, as they lay entwined beneath the fresh linens, Sarah's head pillowed on Henry's chest, she listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate flight from Rawlins to the exhausted, terrified woman, Henry had found on the trail to this moment of perfect contentment a path she could never have imagined, when she took that first step away from danger with Emma on her back. "What are you thinking?" Henry murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking that life has a strange way of bringing us exactly where we need to be, even when it seems we're lost," Sarah replied. "If James hadn't died, if I hadn't fled Rawlins, if you hadn't decided to take that particular route home that day. If you hadn't already walked 29 miles, Henry added, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. 1 mile less and we might never have met. Do you believe in fate, Henry?" He considered the question seriously, his chest rising and falling beneath her cheek. "I believe in divine guidance," he said finally, "in a hand that sometimes steers us through difficult paths toward greater blessings. Does that count as fate?" Sarah smiled against his skin. "It counts as exactly what I needed to hear." As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah sent a silent prayer of gratitude into the night for the strength that had carried her and Emma those 30 miles, for the man who had found them at mile 29, and for the love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. The future stretched before them like an unwritten page, challenges and joys, triumphs and trials, but whatever came, they would face it together, a family forged on the wild frontier, bound by love stronger than any danger or distance. Morning found them still entwined, the early light filtering through the cabin windows to paint patterns on the rumpled bedclothes. Sarah woke first, momentarily disoriented by the weight of Henry's arm around her waist, the unfamiliar yet entirely welcome warmth of his body beside hers. Memories of the previous day flooded back, the warning of danger, the hasty wedding, the night of tender passion that followed. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks even as a smile curved her lips. Wife. She was Henry Cooper's wife now, in name and in truth. As if sensing her thoughts, Henry stirred, his eyes opening slowly to find hers. The smile that spread across his face held such pure joy that Sarah's heart skipped. "Good morning, Mrs. Cooper," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, husband," she replied, delighting in the way his eyes darkened at the word. Henry reached out to trace the line of her cheek, his touch reverent. "I half expected to wake and find this was all a dream." "Not a dream," Sarah assured him, turning her face to press a kiss to his palm. "Though I can hardly believe it myself." They might have lingered longer, exploring this new intimacy, but a knock at the cabin door interrupted the moment. Henry groaned, burying his face against Sarah's shoulder. "If that's Pete coming to ask about the fence line again, I may have to fire him," he muttered. Sarah laughed, pushing gently at his chest. "Go see who it is. I'll get dressed." With obvious reluctance, Henry rose, pulling on his trousers and shirt before running a hand through his tousled hair in a futile attempt at respectability. At the door, he found Mitch, hat in hand and an apologetic expression on his weathered face. "Sorry to disturb you, boss," he said, studiously avoiding looking past Henry into the cabin, "but there's someone at the main house you need to see. Now." The urgency in the foreman's voice erased any annoyance Henry might have felt at the interruption. "Who is it?" "3 men from town. One says his name is Garrett from Rollins Mining. Claims he's looking for a runaway employee who might have sought work in these parts." Mitch's expression hardened. "They're armed and they ain't asking polite." A cold knot formed in Henry's stomach. "Where's Emma?" "Safe with Mrs. Sullivan in the kitchen. They don't know about." Mitch glanced toward the cabin, then back at Henry. "About any of it. Just said they wanted to speak to the owner." "Tell them I'll be right there," Henry said grimly. "And Mitch, make sure the men are nearby just in case. Don't make it obvious, but I want everyone ready if there's trouble." As Mitch hurried back toward the main house, Henry closed the door and turned to find Sarah already dressed, her face pale but composed. "You heard," she nodded, fingers working swiftly to pin up her hair. "I'm coming with you." "Sarah, no, it's too dangerous. I'm your wife now," she interrupted, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "If they see me as Mrs. Cooper, mistress of the Double C, they'll have no reason to connect me to the woman they're seeking. But if I hide, if you face them alone, they might become suspicious." Henry wanted to protest, to insist she stay safely hidden in the cabin, but he recognized the logic in her argument. More importantly, he recognized the courage it took for her to make it. "All right," he agreed reluctantly. "But stay close to me and let me do the talking." They walked to the main house together, Henry's arm around Sarah's waist, both for support and to present the picture of a happily married couple. Sarah drew strength from his solid presence, forcing her breathing to remain even, her steps unhurried despite the frantic pounding of her heart. In the yard before the main house stood 3 men. Thomas Garrett, tall and grim, the scar on his chin visible even at a distance. A stocky, red-faced man Sarah didn't recognize, and a thin, weasel-featured individual who had been one of the company guards at Rollins. Their horses were tethered nearby, dusty from hard riding. As Henry and Sarah approached, Garrett's gaze swept over them, lingering for a moment on Sarah before dismissing her as irrelevant to his purpose. She felt a flicker of hope he didn't recognize her with her hair up, dressed in respectable clothes, walking confidently beside a prosperous rancher. "Mr. Cooper," Garrett called, stepping forward with a hand extended. "Thomas Garrett, Rollins Mining and Ore, thank you for seeing us." Henry shook the offered hand briefly, his expression polite but reserved. "Mr. Garrett, what brings Rollins Mining to my ranch at this early hour?" Garrett produced a paper from his coat pocket. "We're searching for a former employee, or rather, the widow of a former employee, Sarah McAllister. She left Rollins under suspicious circumstances several months ago, taking company property with her. We have reason to believe she may have come to this area." Henry accepted the paper, which appeared to be some sort of warrant, and examined it with a critical eye. "I see. And why would you think she'd come to the Double C specifically?" "We're checking all the ranches and farms in the area," the stocky man interjected. Word is you hire women sometimes for cooking and such. Henry handed the paper back to Garrett. I do employ women, yes, Mrs. Sullivan has been my housekeeper for 15 years. He gestured toward Sarah, his expression softening naturally as he looked at her. And my wife oversees the household and helps with the accounts. Garrett's gaze returned to Sarah, more assessing this time. Your wife. I was under the impression you were unmarried, Mr. Cooper. A recent change in my circumstances, Henry replied with a smile that conveyed both pride and private joy. Sarah and I were married yesterday, as a matter of fact. Reverend Taylor from Sierra Vista performed the ceremony, with Judge Wilson officiating. Half the town was here to celebrate. The casual mention of witnesses, important ones at that, was deliberate, Sarah realized. Henry was establishing their marriage as a public, verifiable fact, not a hasty arrangement that might raise suspicions. Congratulations, Garrett said, though the word held no warmth. He looked at Sarah again, a slight frown creasing his brow. Have we met before, Mrs. Cooper? You seem familiar somehow. Sarah's heart raced, but years of maintaining composure in difficult situations served her well. I don't believe so, Mr. Garrett. I've lived in Sierra Vista for less than a year, and before that, I was in Pennsylvania. The partial truth flowed easily from her lips. Pennsylvania, Garrett repeated thoughtfully. What brought you all the way out here? Before Sarah could respond, the cabin door opened and Abby emerged with Emma in her arms. The baby, spotting her mother, let out a delighted squeal and reached toward Sarah. There's my girl, Henry called, his voice warm with genuine affection. Gentlemen, if you'll excuse my wife, our daughter is clearly impatient for her attention. Sarah moved toward Abby, taking Emma with a natural ease that spoke of long practice. The baby nestled happily against her, one hand reaching for the locket around Sarah's neck, the Christmas gift from Henry that contained a lock of Emma's hair. She was aware of Garrett watching her, of the calculation in his cold eyes. Then his gaze shifted to Emma and a subtle change came over his expression. Cute kid, he said, his tone casual. How old? 9 months, Sarah replied, instinctively holding Emma a little closer. 9 months, Garrett nodded slowly. Born here in Sierra Vista, then. Henry stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Sarah and the mining company men. Mr. Garrett, I understand you have a job to do, but I fail to see how my family's personal details are relevant to your search for this McAllister woman. The implied rebuke was clear, and Garrett had the grace to look momentarily abashed. Of course. My apologies, Mr. Cooper, Mrs. Cooper. Professional habit, we have to be thorough in these matters. Understandable, Henry said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. Now, as I was about to say, we haven't hired any widows recently, nor has anyone matching your description sought employment here. If there's nothing else, my men have work to do and I have a ranch to run. Garrett hesitated, his gaze moving once more between Sarah and Emma. For a heart-stopping moment, Sarah thought he would press further, would demand to know exactly when she had arrived in Sierra Vista, would question the convenient timing of her marriage to Henry. But then the thin, weasel-faced man leaned in to whisper something in his ear, and Garrett's expression cleared. Thank you for your time, Mr. Cooper, he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that fell short of respect. Mrs. Cooper, congratulations on your marriage. As the 3 men mounted their horses and rode away, Sarah fought to maintain her composure until they were well out of sight. Only when the dust of their departure had settled did she allow her knees to buckle slightly, leaning against Henry for support. He knew, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He wasn't certain, but he suspected. Henry's arm tightened around her waist. But he had no proof and, more importantly, no legal standing to question you further. You're my wife now, with all the protection that entails. Emma, sensing her mother's distress, began to fuss. Sarah bounced her gently, the familiar motion calming them both. Will they come back? I don't think so, Henry said after a moment's consideration. They're looking for Sarah McAllister, widow and possible thief. Sarah Cooper, wife of a prominent rancher and mother to a 9-month-old child, doesn't fit that description. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Besides, they'd need more than suspicion to cause trouble now. Judge Wilson and Reverend Taylor are both highly respected in the territory. Their endorsement of our marriage carries weight. Sarah nodded, trying to take comfort in his reasoning. I should have told you everything from the beginning, she said suddenly, guilt washing over her. About James's papers, about what the mining company might really be after. You married me without knowing the full extent of the danger. Henry turned her to face him, his expression serious. Sarah, do you really think that would have changed anything? I married you because I love you, because I want to spend my life with you and Emma. Whatever trouble follows you, we'll face it together. The simple, unwavering certainty in his voice steadied Sarah as nothing else could have. Together, she repeated, the word a promise and a prayer. As they walked back to the main house, Emma babbling happily between them, Sarah felt a strange sense of completion, as if a chapter had closed and another begun. The fear wasn't gone, she doubted it ever would be entirely, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. Whatever Garrett and Rollins Mining might suspect, she was Sarah Cooper now, wife of Henry, mother to Emma, mistress of the Double C. Mile 30 had brought her home at last. Epilogue 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the valley, turning the grass golden and the distant mountains into hazy silhouettes against an impossibly blue sky. From the porch of the main house, Sarah watched as Henry led a small, sturdy pony across the yard, Emma perched proudly on its back. At 5, her daughter was fearless, determined to keep up with her 3-year-old brother Samuel, who despite his younger age was already showing signs of becoming as skilled a horseman as his father. Easy now, Henry called as the pony quickened its pace. Remember what I told you about the reins? Emma nodded solemnly, her dark curls bouncing with the motion. Gentle hands make willing horses, she recited, her small fingers adjusting their grip exactly as Henry had taught her. Sarah smiled, her hand moving unconsciously to rest on the gentle swell of her abdomen where their 3rd child grew. 5 years of marriage had brought more joy than she could have imagined that day on the trail, when a kind stranger had offered a desperate woman a ride at mile 29. They're naturals, both of them, Abby said, joining Sarah on the porch. Though her hair was now completely silver and she had officially retired, 2 years ago, the older woman remained an integral part of the Cooper household, more grandmother than employee to the children. They come by it honestly, Sarah agreed, watching as Samuel toddled over to demand his turn on the pony. Henry says they have Cooper blood through and through. It was true, in spirit if not in biology. Emma, though born to another father, was Henry's daughter in all the ways that mattered. He had formally adopted her on her 2nd birthday, the legal document merely confirming what had been true from the day of their marriage. She called him Papa without hesitation, her biological father a hazy concept rather than a remembered presence. Samuel, born almost exactly 9 months after that first Christmas as husband and wife, had his father's eyes and his mother's determined nature. The new baby, due in late fall, would complete their family, a living testament to the love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. Letter came for you, Abby said, producing an envelope from her apron pocket. From Pennsylvania by the look of it. Sarah accepted it with a nod of thanks, recognizing her sister's handwriting. After years of cautious silence, she had finally reached out to her family back east 2 years ago, when she was confident that the danger from Rollins Mining had truly passed. The joyful reunion by mail had been followed by an actual visit last spring, when her parents had traveled west to meet their grandchildren and the son-in-law they had never expected. I think they're planning another visit, Sarah commented as she broke the seal. Mother hinted as much in her last letter. Abby replied non-committally, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. Sarah's mother had spent most of her visit alternating between marveling at the primitive conditions of Wyoming Territory and proudly telling anyone who would listen about her daughter, who had married the most prosperous rancher in the county. As Sarah read through the letter, family news, gossip from the old neighborhood, excited inquiries about the new baby, she was struck by how distant that earlier life now seemed. Pennsylvania belonged to a different Sarah, a girl who had never walked 30 miles with a baby on her back, never known true fear or true strength, never found a love that could heal even the deepest wounds. "Sarah, come see," Henry called from the yard. "Emma's trotting on her own." Setting aside the letter, Sarah hurried down the steps to join her family, reaching them just as Emma completed a perfect circle on the pony, her small face alight with accomplishment. "Did you see, Mama? Did you see me?" she called excitedly. "I did, my brave girl," Sarah replied, her heart full to bursting. "You're a natural, just like Papa said." Henry's arm slipped around her waist, his hand coming to rest protectively over the swell where their child grew. "She reminds me of her mother," he said softly, for Sarah's ears alone. "Same courage, same determination." Samuel tugged impatiently at Henry's leg. "My turn, Papa, my turn." Laughing, Henry swung the boy up onto the pony, steadying him with careful hands. "Hold tight, little man, I've got you." As she watched her husband and children, Sarah's thoughts turned briefly to Thomas Garrett and the threat he had once represented. They had learned 2 years ago, through Henry's business contacts, that Rawlins Mining had closed following a series of accidents and lawsuits. Garrett had moved on, taking a position with a mining operation in Colorado. The danger had passed, as Henry had predicted it would, leaving behind only the occasional shadow in Sarah's dreams. What remained was this: a family built on love and trust, a home filled with laughter and purpose, a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined during those dark days of grief and fear. "What are you thinking about?" Henry asked, noticing her momentary distraction. Sarah smiled up at him, the man who had found her at mile 29 and changed the course of her life forever. "I was thinking about journeys," she said softly, "and how the hardest paths sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations." Henry's eyes warmed with understanding. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, then rested his own against it, creating a moment of perfect intimacy despite the children's excited voices and the bustle of ranch life around them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cooper," he murmured, the words an echo of that first night, a promise kept through 5 years of shared joys and challenges. "Home," Sarah repeated, the word encompassing everything she had found at the end of her long journey: safety, purpose, family, and a love that had been waiting for her at mile 29 all along. "Yes, I believe it is."